Okay, so I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Nagog Orchard Work Group for March 6, 2024. Roll call. Brad Mitchell, I'm here.
You have some.
Sarah Seward here.
Jen Clancy here.
Amy Tarlow Lewis here.
Okay, so we have a quorum. We're going to do the minutes, but then we're going to move the agenda around a little bit because we do have somebody from the Historical Society. So we're going to go from the minutes to item 4. So first item of order is the minutes of February 21st, 2024. Any discussion or comments?
No. Great.
Wow, that's a first.
I'll make a motion to approve. Submitted.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, motion passes. So let's go directly to, is Linda here? Okay, so we'll go directly to item 4. First, a quick update from me and then Sarah. So as you know, I did do a formal request to DAR on basically whether they would include the house and the barn and that piece of property into the APR. They were somewhat reluctant, but agreed to look at it formally. I did, anticipating potential problems, I did follow through with Jamie Eldridge's office and had a couple conversations with them. I haven't met with Jamie yet, but my expectation is let's see what happens with DAR, how they respond, but maybe to get Jamie to call over and say, you know, this is really what the town wants. It's consistent with the farmland protection plan for the state and that sort of thing. I do think if they do reject us, we may have an option to basically appeal this to the ALPC, which is the Agricultural Land Preservation Committee, which oversees kind of an advisory committee to DAR. I don't know. I know for anything in regulation or statute where DAR denies it, you can appeal to them. This one really isn't covered, but I'll push for it anyhow if they say no. So I do think that's worth pursuing.
It's the Agricultural Land Protection Committee?
Agricultural Land Preservation Committee. So it's kind of an advisory committee to DAR. We made some changes to the statute a few years ago because DAR is unilaterally saying no to things and rejecting things, and they became kind of an appeals board for that process. Legally, we may not fall under it, but I think we can push them into considering it if they say no, because it is a larger policy issue that DAR is considering. So this would be a good test case. So Sarah, I don't know if you have an update on the historical, and then we have Linda from the Historical Commission to present.
So Linda Stein is here. Welcome, Linda. She chairs the Littleton Historical Commission here. So we've been focusing on the top barn and the house in the last couple of weeks. And a question that I had posed to Linda was, is there an opportunity to not only put the structures in historical status, but also the land surrounding that? And Linda, do you have a moment that you just like to talk to the committee and tell them who you spoke with or the good news that you have in terms of the land as well?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So unusually, I have good news to report only. If your APR, if the APR program or whatever doesn't want to include the buildings, from my conversations with the Mass Historical Commission expert, on both fronts, we could probably pursue putting all of the buildings that you're interested in into a historical preservation restriction for each building. There were some questions up front about whether that was possible, and the head of the preservation restrictions at the Historical Commission looked into his concerns about it, and what he said was there can't be any conflicts or overlaps between the APR and historical preservation restriction, because the APR takes precedence, and this can conflict with that. The historical preservation restrictions can conflict. But he did look up the APR on this. I sent him the APR for this site, and he looked it up, and he said there is no overlap, that all of the buildings are carved out of the APR, and therefore each of the buildings could have a historical preservation restriction put on them if that's what you choose to do. Actually, he only could find 2 of the buildings, so he's not sure about the other 2, but most likely the same situation applies to those. Then on the other front, about whether land surrounding the buildings can be included, he said yes. In most cases, historical preservation restrictions include land surrounding a building. So there's no problem with that. Again, as long as the land isn't covered by the APR, there shouldn't be a problem. The way that we would have to pursue this is we'd have to develop what's called inventory forms that go on a state database called MACRIS. I think one of your structures may already have such an inventory form there in the state MACRIS database, but the other buildings don't, I think. And so we'd have to develop them. It's not a big deal. We have an historic preservation consultant on board with our commission, and she would be fine in helping us write up these forms. She would write up the architectural parts of it, which would explain the architectural historical significance. And then probably others of us, like Sarah's already been looking at the history of these buildings, or at least one or two of them. So that has to also be included in the form. The only issue about the forms is it takes a while, not so much to write them, but when you submit them to this MACRIS database, the state database, I think that it takes a while, like months, to get them up because they do it in bulk. They wait to, until they have a bunch of forms to put in. They don't do it one by one. So that would be the holdup, but I don't think you're that close to doing this anyway, so we probably have that time. I think that's all.
That's great. So, Linda, we certainly appreciate all your guidance through this process. So, I think our track right now, as Brad had stated, is that we're waiting to have feedback from APR, so that way we know what track we would go from a historic standpoint. And I will keep working towards getting information on these buildings, so that way, if we do need to do it, we can start really quickly.
Yeah. So that's really helpful. Thank you for all your work, Linda, and we may end up going that way. So unfortunately, I don't think the historical preservation will do what we had hoped, which is to tie those buildings and that parcel to the APR land. With that said, we may not get APR to buy into the program, and APR comes with its own restrictions on what the farmer can do. So we need to weigh that. It would still keep that building in-house from being developed, so it's a benefit. So my suggestion, I spoke to Sarah about this, is let's continue to weigh both options. Both are going to take some time. If it turns out they're not ready in the time for a sale or a lease, the lease is easy. Either way, if it's a sale, we can write into the purchase and sales that this is what's going to happen, whether it be APR or historical, or a lease, we can write it in and say the town will be doing this. So I think right now we're in a hold motion. We need to see how APR comes back. We may even want to see who we ended up looking at and whether APR may not be in their best interest or our best interest, and historical may be better, or vice versa. So we've got something in our back pocket to at least protect those buildings from development. So I think that's great news.
And so what I'm continuing to do is to develop the research on the top barn and the house, so that we have knowledge of years, dates, things like that.
Great. So thank you, Linda, and we will keep in touch, and this is something we're going to continue to explore.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, they went away. Did someone on Zoom have a question? Was it iPhone 9?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Nope. Okay, so get it back on the agenda. We have discussion RFI response and review process. How many RFIs did we get?
15.
We got 15 RFIs. There were some very good proposals in there. I think what we need to discuss is what our process is and what we hope to achieve through that review. From our purposes, I think it was largely kind of market research to see who was out there and who was interested, and whether we thought they were viable. I saw a number of proposals in there, at least on the surface of what we've seen, I think they were viable. I don't know if we need to go through them one by one. It may be something we do on our own and come back and talk about next week, but it's open for discussion. So I guess the real question is, what do we want to get out of the RFI process? And that should drive what we do next. Market research and some direction on where we want to go with the RFP, I think, is probably key.
I guess I would suggest, if each of us brings one or two that we think are the most complete and have the most potential, and there's some agreement on that, then I think we can probably begin to shape the RFP and what we want to put on it. So I guess I would say, you know, some way of ranking them and viewing a subset of them and seeing what commonalities are amongst that group.
Yeah. So,
or the question is their traits, not necessarily the person, but the trait that they bring.
Yeah.
So
the what did they bring?
The traits. Yeah.
So in terms of the nuances of what makes them unique. So whether it's their, you know, their experience or what their process is for vision as well.
We did have a number of parameters that we laid out in the RFI, which I think are pretty sound. I did put a scoring sheet, a rough scoring sheet together. I'm going to use that just for my own purposes to make sure I give everybody equal attention. You're welcome to use it, adapt it or not. But I don't think we need to make public any rankings on this. It's really for our purposes. I don't think we should be mentioning people. Amy has assigned them numbers, so we can refer to numbers if we want to. If folks want rankings or whatever we have, they can request it from us. But I think we've got what we need.
And I think for me, what was most important is that the vision of let's see what is out there. And I think with those 15 responses, we've learned a lot. Mm-hmm. And I know personally, I want to try and figure out, for me, is the track more appealing from a town and an orchard standpoint? Is it more appealing for a lease? And what are the attributes of that, or for a sale? And how do we balance the two?
Yeah.
Right. It's been suggested to me, and I think I'll leave it open for next meeting, that maybe we decide whether we want to go in a particular direction, whether lease or sale. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. I favor a sale. I've been clear on that, but I'm still open to it. My only concern is if based on the RFI, we decide a sale is best. There are people who didn't show their cards during the RFI process who may have a very good proposal for a lease. So we may want to leave that open, but I think we can have that discussion next week. And I'd suggest that we meet next week on our regularly scheduled Wednesday, because we've got something to do. That's my biggest criteria for a meeting. I am increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of lease to own. I'm just bringing this up for thought next time, only because, I mean, I would argue the town never should have got in the farming business. We really don't want to get in the banking business. There's some risk in the town. Yeah. We do a lease to own agreement and somebody walks away. What are we going to do? We're back at square one, and I don't think we want to be there. But we'll leave that discussion for next week when we see it. My personal thought is, you know, Farm Credit East, there's a number of lenders out there. The state's got money for beginner farmers, new entry farmers. I think, you know, if you can't qualify for that, I'm going to question whether you're a viable candidate. But we can have that discussion next week after we reviewed them.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of RFIs people wanted to purchase. I think there was only one that was considering leasing.
Yeah.
So
there was one lease to own as well, at least one lease to own.
Yeah, there was.
Just ask Karen, and I know you have experience with this. We can have an RFP that is separate, or we are going to have to focus on one track, whether it be the sale and we wear that hat, or it's the lease and we wear that hat.
Right. So
do we have to choose?
We have to choose.
Okay.
We have to choose.
So
yeah.
Okay. So
okay. So then next meeting, I think we should review this with the intention of coming up with a recommendation to the select board on which track we want to choose.
Yeah, and this ties into the discussion who's going to draft the RFP. So
right. Related to this, I guess you and Sarah met with somebody who could help us with the RFP, and they had stated that we need to go to town meeting to put out an RFP that included a sale. I questioned that to the town administrator. He checked with Tom Harrington, who agreed with me that we don't need to do that. We certainly do before we go to sell it, but to put out a proposal for sale, we don't have to go to town meeting. He did suggest that we go to the select board and get them to declare it surplus property, which makes it more open and transparent. So I'll look for you guys to do that.
So I would say that we can go to town meeting. I think that it's a discussion as to whether we want to.
Okay.
I'll call it pre-authorization to sell. And I think we just need to weigh the pros and cons, because there's pros and cons to both. We can, if we went to town meeting for pre-authorization, the obvious negative, the obvious drawback there is that we don't know to whom, and we can't really provide a whole lot of insight there. But on the other side, we can take the town residents input into account in terms of what they're looking for, and that we can help shape the RFP, provided we, they voted to give us that authorization. We would have some feedback from them that was provided in a very public way, even more public than what we're doing right now, right? And potentially reaching more people. It will slow us down.
Would your proposal be to put it on this warrant now, or do a quick special?
If we wanted to go for pre-authorization, so to speak, we could do that. We have time to get that done in May.
Okay. So let's plan on a meeting next week. Let's see where we end up with our review of the RFI and where we want to go. If we can't do I'm disappointed we can't do an RFP that includes both, because again, I think there are folks out there who didn't want to show their hands and respond who may have great lease ideas. But if we have to choose, we have to choose.
And
so if we put off the discussion, which I think we need to review the RFIs first this time. Okay.
the town administrator about doing some sort of presentation at town meeting. Everyone's in favor.
Okay.
So I think we can, if we have a warrant, obviously it's even more of an opportunity to do a quick presentation on the warrant article.
The downside of that, I think, is some people are going to hear sale, and I think most reasonable people are going to say, I don't want to vote to sell it until I know who's going to do it and what they want to do with it. So that's the flip side of that. So
how we want to shape it. And if we want, we can hold another workshop type meeting to get more input before we issue it.
Yeah, I think at the very least that would be a good idea.
Opportunity for public input on a bigger scale.
So my suggestion is let's table this discussion until after we review the RFIs and come up with some consensus on where we think we might want to go.
So just to clarify, theoretically we could go to town meeting in May, get permission, then put out the RFP.
And then we've got to go back though and get permission again.
Right.
In October, early November.
And legally, it's not to say we shouldn't do it. We don't need to go to town meeting to get permission to put it in the RFP. We do need to get a sale in the RFP. We do need to get permission to actually sell it.
Yep. The basic question is, do we want to get that authorization to issue the RFP from the select board town meeting?
Right. And I think the legal proceedings is for one or the other to declare it surplus property.
And they would have to do that. Right.
That is the
pre-authorization.
Yeah.
So, and we can do it either through the select board or through town meeting. Advantages and disadvantages to both. Let's see where we end up in our RFI reviews. Anything else on the RFI response and review process? I think so.
People think the best, most effective, efficient way of reviewing these is?
Well, I come back to the fact that I think that every person is going to understand in their minds whether they would like to go for a sale or for a lease. And I think that's truly the question that's on the table, is which do we want to go for?
No, I think we all know that's the end result of our review, but we need to figure out what exactly we're going to do a review.
I would simply, I don't think you can do 50. And I don't even think that you have to come up with your top two. That's where I come back to the characteristics. So I would personally just say, just ask every person, would you like to sell? Would you like to lease? And then we can start to work towards characteristics of, or criteria for the RFP. You must be this, you must be this, so, in order to even do the bid.
Personally, I'm going to go through sort of an objective review process for each one to make sure I evaluate them all on the same parameters, and every one of them I give them each their due. Yeah.
Two.
Well, I may have top four because right now I'm looking at there's four who are pretty much equivalent. So, but I think they all will have similar characteristics. Right. And if we're reviewing it with that goal in mind, I think that's helpful. The other thing I think we need to determine is, do we want to include the house and barn as part of that sale, or do we want to leave that open? So I think those are two. Do we want lease and sale of the APR, and what do we want to do with the house and barn as part of that?
I think we can made at least 4.
Agreed.
Your top 4. What were they?
Yeah. Experience.
Yeah. Then.
Or some financials, or
Sure. Vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think in the end it'll be a combination of the above.
Yeah.
Okay. Agreed. And we do have those 4 parameters in the RFI, which I think we're somewhat beholden to consider since we put them in. You had a question, sir?
Name and address.
With all the talk of leasing or deciding if the town's going to only sell it, with that discount, leasing candidates that want to lease it, even though lease to own, I know you mentioned you'd come to be a bank. And there's other loans for agricultural loans out there. I think for someone to make it this orchard viable, you would need those kind of loans for other agricultural requirements. Such as,
So I think what we're going to determine in the next meeting, whether we want to go in the direction of leasing or owning, and that's a recommendation to the select board. And as far as how it's financed, I think, we'll every applicant to the RFP will be evaluated separately, whether they've got cash in hand or whether they've got, a letter of credit from Farm Credit East or private bank or something like that. But I think they'd be well suited for any RFP to show that they've got that financing largely lined up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I guess so.
So the vast majority of applicants want to purchase.
Yeah. I guess it's pretty clear that I'm an applicant, and I'm looking to, my whole vision for the plan for this is I don't want to lease it forever. But in order to get all the other investments needed to make this into something other than like a pastured little farm that amounts to nothing, to make it like a pick your own operation, you need to borrow a lot of money unless you have like $3 million in the bank. You could then build a business big enough that you could then buy the farm out, but that's really unrealistic without potential to lease. And I don't want to be discounted on the fact that I'm not looking to buy it outright. And if that is something to be discounted, I feel like it would be fair to, have me read through my proposal with that in mind.
So the RFI is really kind of our market research. So once we make a determination, it's not binding. So once we make a determination and we get approval and all that on which way to go, it's the RFP. So you can adapt whatever you submitted to the RFI and change it. So I think so. We have one gentleman I think who had lease to own in his proposal. If we go in the direction of sale, then they'd have to adapt their RFP to that thing. But the RFI isn't binding at all, so that doesn't carry over. Okay, sorry if I wasn't getting.
Yeah, and I think the new information that we have is we have to decide, like, you either put out an RFP that's for lease or purchase. Like, you can't do both, if I understand correctly.
That's what we just learned recently. Yeah. So that's why things have just kind of changed a little bit in our vision. So that way, the next meeting, we're all going to hopefully decide what each member's thoughts are, like what track to take, so that we have a clear vision.
To put out an RFP, RFP that would allow either lease or own people to propose either. But what we're being told is you can only do one or the other. So our process is we're going to review the RFIs, come to some consensus here, make a recommendation to the selectmen, and we'll see where it goes after that.
Helpful to us during this phase, but it has zero bearing on the evaluation phase.
Yeah, that was more for us, so we know what people are thinking and how we can adapt our process to get the best people in there. So
I think we're going to we're going to work with council to figure out.
It's not going to be for this season. You know, we would hope to have it done so next spring we've got somebody ready to work on that property, either as a lessee or an owner.
And I think we all recognize that one of the barriers to getting into the property is the cost of getting it up to speed. So it's a challenge. For sure.
We discussed at the last meeting, once we've got somebody and we're working through the process, could they come in early? Yeah, but I think that'd be some risk for them because the whole proposal could fail at town meeting and you just put a lot of effort in for no return. So that somebody wants to do it, I think we'd entertain it, but the risk is all on their part. So yes, Tom.
Straight. Glad you got a lot of responses. You had mentioned that someone may put in a weak RFI, but could come back and do a strong RFP that counts. And there's some talk about giving feedback to the person that or the organization that's out RFI, because they don't know what they're competing with. And then you've mentioned or suggested this evening, but mentioned previously, some things are weak in some areas and strong in other. So just to, if someone does a weak RFI or it's ambiguous, it'd be good for them to know it, and then they could generate what they need for the appropriate RFP response.
So for my part, I'm going to do a ranking sheet for each one, and they're welcome to request that. And but other people have their own approach, and we're all volunteers with limited time, so I'm going to leave it to them. But for my part, people, if they want to know see my ranking sheet, I'm happy to share it. It's basically the 4 main parameters we identified in the RFI, whether they identify whether they want to lease or buy it, and then comment section. So,
right. So I can. My hope is next week we will give what we felt were the strongest characteristics to kind of mold it down. And so it would then be the responsibility of the person that submitted an RFI earlier to be like, oh, did I personally hit those marks? And so going forward, that would allow them to self-reflect. And they would be like, okay, I probably should have been a little stronger here. So that's my goal for next week, to kind of come up with what kind of led us to the top people.
And I've only seen a couple of them, but of the ones I've seen, some are very vague. And I'm sure you feel that too.
Yeah.
And say, yes, we can do it, but they don't demonstrate how they can do it.
So I just sort of wanted to address an issue. So I know that you had put in a request to be able to see all the RFPs. And RFIs, thank you. And I just want to make really clear that they are not to be shared with other applicants. Everyone does their own work and brings their own like proposal to the table. Like, we will give feedback, but please don't share them with every applicant, because then that really makes all of our work a moot point and undermines the other applicants.
I don't intend to necessarily get.
So to be fair, any applicant can request all the RFIs.
Yeah.
So it's not up for any of us or Don or anybody else to share them, but they can. iPhone 2, you had a question, and if you could identify yourself. iPhone 2.
Yeah.
I'm trying to unmute them. Come on.
Hold on, we're trying to unmute you. No, you had it there for a second.
Are you able to, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay,
and what's your name and address, please?
Sorry, this is Hazel, and I am Mendon. And the question I had is just as far as timeline on feedback of initial RFI submission, because having written many business plans in my life, it's an arduous, the RFP is an arduous process of like sussing out numbers. And I mean, I generally take quite a long time to build them. So if the feedback on the RFI is, this is not what we're looking for, I do not want to embark on that massive project of writing the RFP. So I was just wanted to get a sense of like, the timeline for feedback and because that would help me plan to start like looking at numbers and financing and whatnot for the RFP. Sorry, and I'll mute myself.
I think next week, tune in next week, and I think you'll have more detail.
Yeah, Hazel would be appropriate to tune in.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I heard the moderator, but I didn't hear the secondary commentary.
What Brad said, that yes, it would be great to just tune in next week.
Okay, sounds good.
And again, we may not all have individual feedback on each RFI submission. I will. So for what that's worth.
Thank you.
Which may not be much, but I will do the best I can.
That's great. Thanks.
Any other discussion on the RFI process? Okay, next on the agenda, the well update. Sarah?
Yes. So last Wednesday, Skilling's company, we were up at the top barn. And so I'll just kind of read through notes. We were there from 8:30 to 1. The control box was not working. We disconnected that. We know that we do have power to that well. So there's 12 feet of casing from the top of the water down. We've got 17 feet of grade. The well is approximately 145 feet deep with a casing of 140 feet. The Gould pump does not work. It was a 1994. So we removed that, and Skilling's put in a temporary casing and pump. So we did a pump test. We got a solid 10 gallons per minute, which was excellent. We did pull a water test that was testing for only arsenic and stain. And so that went to Neshoba that day. I spoke with Corey Godfrey today. It's not in today. It will be in the next 2 days. We did install a new well cap. So we feel that the well is suitable for irrigation. If someone wishes to have potable water, they would then need to go to the Board of Health. They would have to test the water for that as well. But right now there's no pump in the well. It's just has a temporary cap on it. And then as soon as I have the feedback for the water test, which should be the next 2 days. So promising.
The test was for arsenic and what else?
It's what they call a stain test.
Okay.
So
okay.
What was suggested. The water department did the facilitating it with Skilling's, and Skilling's was great.
Our number of components.
So as soon as we have that, I'll share that. So from an irrigation standpoint, good.
Okay, so I think the end goal of this will be have something we can provide to anybody responding to the RFP to give them a better idea what they're there. Folks should know that the Board of Health is proposing to include irrigation wells in drinking water requirements. The AgCom is providing some feedback on that, and we've been talking to the Department of Agricultural Resources, and they've actually gone back to DEP, and they all kind of agree that that's not appropriate. So hopefully we'll have an answer to that before the RFP process. Littleton Board of Health. Yeah, no, they do Neshoba is kind of the enforcer, but the Board of Health does a policy. From my perspective, former Board of Health chair, drinking water is not irrigation. And where it's worked in every other place I've ever dealt with, you put a sign up on any outlet for the water and said not potable water, and you use it for irrigation. I think that's where they need to go, but we'll see. And again, I spoke to DAR about some concerns with this, and they're talking to DEP, who I think is going to change their guidance. So hopefully we'll have that resolved before the RFP. Sure.
All good news.
Anything about the lower well, or that wasn't?
It's old.
Okay.
So, and it's in the middle of the field. So, someone would just need to use that. That would just be irrigation.
As long as we're on the spectrum of testing, somebody did submit one of the soil tests they did. Pretty low levels of lead. They didn't do arsenic. It was well below whatever I've only seen a recommended threshold in the US for lead, but it's well below that. With that said, neither lead nor arsenic move a whole bunch in the soil. So what I've seen in orchards before is you go 12 feet over and you can get it pretty high level. So it's helpful, but doesn't give you the entire picture of what's happening in that orchard. So, and again, we've left that up to applicants to do the testing and make the determination on their own whether that is a concern for them.
Yep. And shout out to Hazel for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Hazel.
Can we get those 3 test results on our website for people to review? And so just in looking at like phosphorus and nitrogen levels and things like that, like did you see any sort of like, it would be really great for growing this type of crop or that type of crop?
It's 1 test in 50 acres. So honestly, I didn't take much notice of that because it doesn't mean much unless you know what you want to plant right there. Okay.
Someone iPhone 2.
Hazel? Is that Hazel?
Yeah.
It's Hazel, sorry. I was just going to mention that on the 2 soil, I actually had 3 samples of the soil tests. I did put in what I had it tested for, which was maintenance of apples, brambles, and hay, orchard grass hay. So those are the 3 crops that I feel like are sort of touchstones for, you can get a good idea in general from looking at those 3. So that's what the soil samples were tested for, and they are labeled that way. So
thank you. Thank you. That could be very helpful.
Okay, next on the agenda is a tax update. If you remember, there was some discussion with the assessor where she was citing a law that basically said she had to assess property taxes on lessees who are leasing town property. I kind of looked at the law and pushed back on that a little bit. In looking at the citation of the law she cited, it exempted properties used with a public purpose.
This is down to Matt and Sarah. Okay.
I looked into Article 97, which is where APR gets its authorization from, and Article 97 essentially declares agriculture to be a public purpose. So I've made the argument to her and asked her to check with DOR as to whether agriculture property would then be exempt from that requirement that the town tax a lessee. She cited the law back to me, and I spoke to the town administrator today and asked that he work with her to try to get a straight answer as to whether agriculture is considered a public purpose under that statute. I do know she called DOR. My experience with DOR is you get different lawyers on different days. Some of them know APR better than others. So I do think it's something, especially if we're considering leasing, that we need to consider. If it's a lease that we're putting in there, we can waive it, say, for the first 5 years to help them cover the cost of maintenance or pulling the trees out. If it's a tax, we can't. So it would be a hindrance to us if we had to tax a leasee at 61A rates. So beyond that, Sarah, I know you went out with the assessor and she looked at the property and came out with some rates. I still think they're high, but I'm not going to fight it.
Okay. So the good news, and can share this document as well, is that the taxation prior was just about $33,000, and it's now down to 14. And I think what's interesting is that that does include the lower barn and garage as well. So it is comprehensive. There are 6 separate parcels. One thing that's important to note is that the house value dropped over $335,000 with the reassessment walking through. So we did walk through every building and some of the older structures as well.
Having the heating pipes burst will do that too.
Changed. It's good for the townspeople to know is that the house, so the first 1 acre of the house has to be assessed at $248,300. And so that's the same for every house in our town of Littleton. And then you add the house value on top of that, which is over $270,000, and the house is rated at the lowest level as very poor. So, and then the ag is valued at $1,002 per acre. So the current tax rate actually went down, which it was prior to this assessment, $25.37. The tax roll now is $23.11. So I feel that we've made substantial headway. We've cut it at least in half. And what I do feel the assessors has been really very busy. Obviously, this is abatement season as well, and they were very gracious to meet me out on site and just kind of crunch numbers as well. So I feel like this is a work in progress. The hope is that it may continue to go down more once with Brad's information, and that we'll just keep working at it. I'm working with the assessors and we'll just keep going. But good news is it's going down.
But to be clear, like what you're talking about isn't a change in the valuation, it's a waiving of the taxes.
Yeah.
The valuation would be, whatever the valuation the assessor ends up on is the valuation. And
unless somebody challenges or changes. Right. Yeah.
Right. But what we're talking about is who is exempt from paying those taxes.
Right. So what I was talking about was there's a section of law which I had never seen before, which basically requires the town to charge a lessee taxes, the property tax rate. And I had never seen it before in agriculture. There was some case law where somebody was leasing a mansion from the town when the court said, yeah, you got to pay the taxes. And that's fine. I poked into it a little bit, and I personally think that agriculture exempt from that law because it's a public purpose, and that law exempts public purpose. And agriculture is defined in the Constitution as a public purpose. So I think there's a fairly strong argument to be made that that law does not apply to to farmland. The ramifications of this, if we lease it and we're required to tax the lessee, we can't waive that in lieu of improvements to the property. If it's a lease rate, we can. So my preference, and the law is a law, whatever DOR tells her, my hope would be that I'm right and we can waive the tax on agricultural property if we need to. So that's working.
And just so that I understand a little bit more deeply. So let's say someone purchased it and they farmed it for 2 years and had tax receipts or whatever. They can then put it into chapter. Do they have to? And then that would reduce it even more.
APR is going to be the lowest.
APR will be the lowest rate over chapter.
This is right now the best case.
Okay.
So is that APR?
This is ag value.
I mean, not APR, 61A?
So this
Is that 61A though? Okay. So we would double check. I mean, it's a discussion further on down the line. It's not in agriculture now and hasn't been for 2 years. So technically it doesn't qualify for 61A. It would qualify for 61B. It would not, in my opinion, she could not charge commercial rate on that or residential on that property because it can't legally be used for that purpose. So,
but you still have to pay for the land that it sits on at that high value, like for the house.
Oh, the house is, I'm just talking about the APR now. Okay. You know, the house is the residential rate. That's not agriculture. But for the 52 acres of orchard, I'm not sure which rate she's using. It's a little bit confusing. And to be honest, I'm not sure the law addresses this situation.
She's using $2.
And so that's 61A for orchard.
This
If it's CPR, I don't think 61A applies.
No, 61A does apply because 61A charges a different rate depending on what the value of the crop you're growing. So every APR owner in the state has to basically apply for 61A every year. And I used to get questions why. It's because you pay more if you've got, you know, vegetables versus pasture.
But in general, usually the rate for conservation easement, APR, or chapter is about the same. It may differ a little bit.
So anyhow, she's come up with a rate, but the only thing I want to make sure she's not charging commercial on that because I don't think she legally can.
Yeah, but just to go back to what Don just said, like the assessor doesn't get to pick. If she shows up and she sees vegetables, that's what she's going to charge. If she sees hay, she's going to charge something else.
Well,
they saw the condition. Value they felt they could put on it. So defunct right now. So I felt comfortable with that, but I will confirm the chapter question. Thank you.
Okay. Sale versus lease. I just wanted to bring up, we've already gone over that. I will say I've had some difficulties in working with the town as this chair. I can't imagine having to, with the amount of work and flexibility that's going to be needed to bring up this farm. I just want to say I can't imagine leasing this and having to work with the town to do that. It would be challenging. So
consider finding somebody who could oversee.
We'd have to hire.
Well, even then they're going to have to deal with the different town offices. So
to oversee the lease itself.
Well, I mean, except you are going to bring in taxes and conservation and town administrator's office are all going to have something to say about it. I just want to say and this is just, it's not anybody in particular. It's just the nature of town government. Given the amount, it's one thing renting a hayfield and you pay them it's another thing when you've got the repairs to the barn and wetlands and all. This is going to be really complicated.
I guess my it's doable. It would be very expensive.
Well, no, but my point is,
the HB visas, we talked about everything, and that was pushed aside. That was not the direction that the committee wanted to go to. That was really some of the first meetings that we had when the committee started.
But my point is simply that it would be the amount of work and the amount of flexibility and the challenges of bringing this property up. You're going to have to deal with a lot of town offices, and that adds just a whole nother level of complexity of it. Sure. If you're leasing it, and that's my only point. Yeah.
You need another department to deal.
Well, even if you had a department, they're not going to take over the assessor's office. They're not going to take over the conservation commission. Yeah, and you saw the tax rate. We don't have enough to hire somebody, and I do think that townspeople should get something back for this purchase. So anyway, well, it may be moot next week, depending how we go, but it is a consideration. If we do move towards a lease, I think we need to emphasize that the town really needs to be flexible and work with whoever the lessee is, because there's a lot that's going to go into this. That's going to if the town still owns it, it's going to take a lot of permissions and thoughtfulness, and we need cooperation and flexibility.
Yeah, but I don't think the Littleton taxpayer really has a stomach to put in $500,000, $1 million into this property annually. Yeah, I don't believe it's there at all.
I don't think, and with our current financial situation with the budget, that expense could not have come at a worse time. I mean, we had slush funds for years for things, but they were all gone, and we're really struggling. So.
And I think a lot of people still haven't heard that message yet. So, and that's where, when we go for the pre-authorization, it's like FinCom would have to be like, this is really hard time.
And whether we go to town meeting or just to the Board of Selectmen, I do think we need to invite FinCom to that presentation. Okay, meeting schedule. I'm going to suggest that we do meet next Wednesday and get back on our regularly scheduled meeting. I assume everybody's okay with that. I don't think we need a vote.
2 weeks, or we want to decide?
Well, so we've got scheduled every 2 weeks, but that's not to say if we have need, we can't meet sooner. I don't mind meeting more often if we have a need. And we're going to get a lot of work done. I don't want to meet with a light agenda or really no work product from that meeting. So, but I'll let them know. So we will be meeting a week from today. If you could send me any agenda items, I think it's basically focused on the RFI review and discussion. I would leave it at that because I think that's going to take the bulk of it.
No, I was going to do that under other business.
Okay. So anyway, we're on other business, Matthew. Yeah, I think our regularly scheduled meetings were every other week, starting next week. We threw this one in. So anyhow, we'll be meeting next week if that works. So can you make it? Because this is important. I think we have everybody there. So is a week from today a problem? Because no, okay. No, because I do think we need everybody at this one. It's too important. Okay. Because otherwise I'd be happy to reschedule.
To be here. Some flexibility to start, say 7:15.
I can change the agenda and move it to a bit later. So why don't we send for 7:15? Okay. And I'll follow through with Will and let him know that he needs to have this review these and what he thinks. Okay. Okay. So next, other business. Matthew, you said you had something.
So asbestos test done because of spread on insulation, cold storage of the upper barn. On Friday morning, someone from Northeast Environmental came. He took 3 samples off 3 homes, and the test came back negative for asbestos, 0% asbestos.
Good.
Great.
That's some good news.
Yeah.
Perfect. I did have something on other business. I would like to ask town council or the TA to redact on the RFIs people's personal information or private info, so name, address, phone number, email, to applicants who gave very detailed proposals, provided a list of their asset, like their farm assets with their valuations. That needs to be redacted. That's not for public consumption. And anything else that, you know, we had another applicant who's very much driven by their Christian faith. I think, you know, that is not for public consumption.
So, but I just want to be clear, everything that is submitted is now for public consumption. Just like on the RFI that it is for public consumption. So I'm very sympathetic to the fact that folks may not have read the RFI completely and may have submitted information that they would now rather not have. And I support going and getting back to see what we can redact. I do not think that we can make a determination here to what should be redacted. I think that's
we can make a request.
Yeah.
That's what public records law details, and there's not much they allow you to redact. Medical records and things like that. My understanding is most of what you've listed, we can't redact. Maybe some of the financials, but that's up to council. We can make the request. 1 second. Yeah, but the public records law is going to dictate it. Council will refer to that. Yes, sir.
Open to the public, but if people are going to send out all the proposals, if we could just like redact at least like name and job experience, and just out of respect for like where
I don't think we can do that. I think the best we can do is ask council to, according to public records law, redact whatever is allowed under law.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask that anyone who puts in a public request is very thoughtful about that, because people's are working at other places and things of that nature, and they need to be very respectful of that.
I thought that the point was that before any of this was released to the public, we would have it redacted before Diane's responded to the public records request.
We hadn't discussed redacting anything before, to my knowledge.
Okay, so we should.
So can we make a can we make a request?
Talk to Diane.
Yeah, and I think the message should be: please tell us we want to redact as much as the law allows, which I don't think is much.
You know what you're going to say.
Well, I think we had that disclaimer in the RFI. You know.
Think about you can change that.
I think he.
What's that?
I think he's on this. You're talking about potential bid review.
Right.
Yeah. But again, if we could make a request to Diane to get counsel, and whatever we can redact, we will. I don't have a problem with that. But it's governed by the public records law, not us.
I've already spoken to her in the town council. The TA today about it, and they said either they could do it or town council could do it, but they would talk to town council first.
They want to.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, unanimously, I think we can say whatever we can legally redact, we should.
Why is it so hard? So Jason's phone. So
you're relying on me, which is a problem.
Look on the ask to unmute.
Yeah, Jason, I think you have yourself muted. So Jason, you have your hand up. You had it there for a second, buddy.
Can you put something into the chat?
No, there's no chat.
So all it allows is for us to ask him to unmute. We don't have him muted. He's got himself muted, according to this. There's no chat. So Jason, I'm not sure what's going on, but we can't unmute you. It says we have to ask you. Make him a co-host. So Jason, I apologize. I'm not sure what's going on. Either you have yourself muted or something funky's going on, but we can't unmute you from our end. You know, there's not much we can do, so let's move on.
Mute all.
Okay, try it again, Jason, if you're still interested in asking a question. He's gone. All right, apologize for that. I'm not sure what's happening there. Any other business?
iPhone 2. Hazel.
Hi.
Hazel. No, we can't unmute Hazel.
Can you hear me?
There you go, Hazel.
Yep. Okay, sorry. Someone punches a button when I unmute and it remutes me. But anyway.
That's me.
Don't hit the button. Resist. But, so my question is, when you put out your criteria for the RFPs, will you be very clear about confidentiality? Because I'm entirely uncomfortable making any financial statement that would become a part of the public record. It's just too dangerous with like identity theft. So like, you know, can you, when you put that piece together, will you have that sorted?
Yeah. So Hazel, what typically happens in my field, which is not Massachusetts state procurement, but typically, and what we do at the federal level is there's a direction for a disclaimer that you have to put on the bottom of all of your pages. And if you have something that you need protected, you'll have to identify it. You'll have to say, this page has proprietary and confidential information.
No, so, I'm familiar. Yeah,
that would protect it from public records law then.
Okay.
So
yeah, I'm
Mass public records law is a little bit different in my experience, where unfortunately the law is, they're a pain in the ass, yeah. But they're very explicit on what can and can't be redacted and what has to be disclosed. So I think for the RFP process, maybe what we can do is get, I'm sure the public records law has a webpage where you can go to and it gives guidance. We can post that so people, if there's a way to protect it, you can claim it, or if there's not, you know there isn't.
Well, what I would love to see is submitting an RFP with like projected, you know, like things like projected farm income and blah, 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 but without submitting your personal information. And then if you get to the sort of finished stages of the process and you're one of the sort of finalists, then you could do a confidential financial review. But putting any personal financial information in any forum, I'm sorry, but even the state, they don't protect their records at all. I mean, they're very, I don't
think we're going to do a multi-step process. And I think public records law is going to dictate what we can and can't disclose. Okay.
So yeah. I guess what I'm asking is that when you sort what you're
Hazel, you're breaking up. Sorry.
Hazel, you just broke up. Can you just repeat what you said?
Like I'm sorry. I don't want to disclose any more information that I absolutely have to about any of my personal financial stuff. So I guess are you supposed to be very quick? I just with information in the RFP, I don't want to add any more information than.
So two things, Hazel. I think we'll try to get some guidance on the public records law to you. And I would suggest that you familiarize yourself with it as well if you're that concerned. Karen, do you have?
Yeah, I would just say that I understand the desire not to disclose information. We have to have enough information to be able to evaluate respondents And to a certain extent, our hands are going to be tied by, as Brad pointed out, public records law. On the other hand, we have no desire to air information that we don't have to either. So I think everybody just needs to read up to the extent they, to the extent they're able on what, how their information will be protected. Make sure that they respond. And understand that
you unmuted him.
This is how businesses. This is a very regulated form, a very regulated process, and so lots. It's doable and it's navigable. And I think you'll be able to get there without revealing more than anybody else has to.
No, that's lovely. Thank you.
Doing business with the Commonwealth or any of the municipalities in the Commonwealth, this is part of it, unfortunately. It's a different set of rules in private industry. So we will get redacted what we can. We will try to direct you to the public records law so you can make your own determination what you can and want to share. And I think that's about all we can do. But given that information, you may need to decide whether it's, bidding on a public piece of property is right for you.
No, thank you. I understand. I guess my only primary concern is limiting what is necessary to share and what is not necessary.
Right. And we're going to ask council to redact whatever we can. When you get to the RFP, which will be much more detailed, we'll try to get you some guidance, but I would encourage you to check with the public records law yourself if you're that concerned.
I certainly will. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on. Jason, I think we got you so you can talk now. What's your question?
Yeah. Sorry about that. I apologize to everyone.
What's your name and address, Jason?
My name is Jason Dustin. I'm from North Reading, Massachusetts. I just had a quick question. I didn't enter an RFI because of just this. It wasn't clearly defined whether we were buying, selling, leasing. And I couldn't really come up with an exact proposal. So is this going to be open to the public for the RFP, or is it excluded to only people?
They're different processes altogether. The RFI was largely for us to gauge what the interest was and the qualifications out there to help us draft the RFP. So if you didn't submit for the RFI, or if you did submit for the RFI, you can still submit for the RFP.
Yeah, that's the way I interpreted it. Okay, I thank you. That answered my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Any other business or questions? All right. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Good
night.